Hi friends, thank you for joining me again this week as we study and reflect on the questions that are asked throughout Scripture. Sometimes these questions are asked by God, sometimes they're asked by Jesus, sometimes they're asked by other people. You may have noticed as you've read Scripture that many of the questions are asked when Jesus is about to heal someone. Just a few weeks ago, we talked about Jesus asking Bartimaeus, "What do you want me to do for you?" It makes sense. Think about the questions you are asked when you go to the doctor today. Are you in any pain? From 1 to 10, what level is your pain? What symptoms do you have? How long have you had them? Are you taking any medication? Are you allergic to any medication? These routine questions are necessary for a doctor to assess an illness, to give a correct diagnosis, and to provide the right treatment for whatever your ailment may be. Jesus often asks similar questions when he heals people in Scripture. He asked the Gerasene demoniac, "What is your name?" He asks, "How long has this been happening to him?" to the father who brought his son to Jesus, who was suffering from seizures. He asks, "Can you see anything?" after Jesus applies his own saliva to the eyes of a blind man. But Jesus sometimes asks different kinds of questions as well. Questions that are more directed to the person's spiritual well-being than their physical well-being. What do you want me to do for you? Who touched me? And the question we will look at today: do you want to be made well? It's a seemingly strange question to ask someone who is not well, but we hear these words from the Gospel of John, chapter 5, verses 1 through 9. After this, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, there was a pool, called in Hebrew Bethzatha, which has 5 porticos. In these lay many invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there for a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I am making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. While he was in Jerusalem in observance of a Jewish festival, Jesus went to the pool of Bethzatha, sometimes called Bethesda. It was near the sheep gate, one of several gates into the city of Jerusalem, and it was surrounded by 5 porticos, which were covered porches. At times, water would be released in surges from reservoirs in the hills around the city, causing the spring to bubble up and sink down rapidly. This natural phenomenon gave rise to a local legend that an angel comes down from heaven and stirs the water. And when the water is stirring, the first person who gets into the pool would be miraculously healed of any sickness that they had. For this reason, this legend, the pool attracted many people. Those listed in this scripture passage, those who were blind, those who were unable to walk or move freely, and many others, all waiting for the water to rise and hoping for the miracle of healing. The man in the scripture passage has been ill for 38 years. He had been on the edge of that pool for a long time, the text says. Perhaps his friends or family had been there with him at some point, had shared his hope of healing, and had been willing to help get him to the water when it stirred. Maybe over the years they were discouraged and had given up hope. Whatever the case may be, it was unlikely that this man was ever going to make it to the pool first. without someone's help. And yet there he was, still waiting by the waters. Jesus approaches him, seeming to know his plight, and asks him, "Do you want to be made well?" Jesus could have simply commanded the disease to depart from the man as he did for others. He could have stretched out his hand and touched the man to heal him. He could have helped him be the first person to get into the pool when the waters stirred. But instead he asks, "Do you want to be made well?" And we think to ourselves, of course he wanted to be made well. He had been ill for 38 years. As a child, I always wondered why this man didn't just sit on the edge of the pool and jump in at the first hint of a ripple in the water. As an adult, I've often heard this story interpreted with a tone of judgment. The idea that when Jesus asked, "Do you want to be made well?" instead of saying yes, the man answers with excuses. "I don't have anyone to put me in the pool, and when I try to get there myself, other people get in front of me." I've heard these words interpreted through a lens of learned helplessness. And there may be some of that in this story, but I think it may be more nuanced than that as well. This man has lived his years as someone who is unable to engage in everyday life with others. If he has a family, he has not been able to provide for them. He probably would not have been allowed in the temple due to his illness or disability. He may have had to beg in order to get his needs met. His worldview was narrow as he sat near the pool, focusing all of his attention and energy on waiting for someone to help him into the pool at just the right time. This story seems to me to be much more about being restored fully to society, restored to community, than about being able to walk. Do you want to be made well? Does he? There would be just as many, if not more, barriers in his life if he were suddenly to be healed. Restarting his life, finding work, possibly still being seen as an outsider, as the world would have changed so much in the 38 years he had been waiting at the pool. And then as quickly as the conversation began, Jesus says, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." And the man took his mat and began to walk, just like that. Do you want to be made well? Do you? At first glance, it seems like such an obvious question, but when we stop to think about it, it's not so easy to answer after all. Some of us know the feeling. We want the healing. We want to be free from the burdens we carry, but we truly cannot see a way through our problem or the way out of our predicament. We've become accustomed to our woundedness. We feel alone, with no one to help. Do you want to be made well? What in your life needs wellness? Is it something physical, emotional, spiritual? Are you willing to take the necessary steps to be made well? Are you willing to take a risk, to step into an unfamiliar way of being in the world? To let go of the past and to trust in a different future? To engage in relationships differently? How would you respond if Jesus looked at you and said, "Be well, stand up, take your mat, and walk"? Would you be excited? Hesitant? Grateful? Do you want to be made well? Our question for the week. And I hope you'll take some time with me to reflect on this question from Jesus as we consider what kind of wellness may need to happen in our lives. Take good care this week, and peace to you. Amen.